And we are live. Hello, everybody joining. Welcome to this webinar, Traditional versus Modern Internal Platforms, Find the Differences. Welcome, everybody. So if you already joined, make yourself familiar with Zoom. There's a chat that you can use. You can also use it to say hi. If you do so, please make sure that you select panelists and all attendees before sending your message. Otherwise, this will only go to us, to the three of us, Manuel, Kasper, and myself. So feel free to say hi in the chat. We'll wait for probably 1 or 2 more minutes before we get this started. Yeah, so Dominica and Nick, thanks. Try to select panelists and attendees before sending messages in the chat, then everybody can see them. Aaron, same thing. Please select panelists and all attendees. Nice, good. It's always confusing in Zoom. I'm struggling with this every single time. So we give this 1 or 2 more minutes to allow people to join. And maybe a few housekeeping rules. So this is being recorded, this webinar. We'll share a recording with you tomorrow, together with all the links and probably some more material to back up what we will talk about today. Also, if you have questions during the webinar, then just put them into the chat. I'll have an eye on that and then bring them into the discussion. Yeah, it's great to see people from many different places. Manuel, I think some people in the chat are already stealing your idea of asking people where they are from, but they have to answer this then a second time, which is fine.
Yeah, that's always one of the nice things, to just see where people are connecting from, and you feel this
absolutely
like global network. So, well, we have a question for that, but it's good to share as well in the chat.
Absolutely. All right, cool. I would say 2 to 3 minutes in, let's get started. And I'm pretty sure people that will join from here can still catch up. So welcome again to tonight's webinar, Traditional versus Modern Internal Platforms, Find the Differences. And I'm super happy to have Kasper and Manuel with me in this webinar. So Kasper, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to. So I'm Kasper. I'm the CEO of Humanitech. I've been doing everything platform for the last decade. Super excited about these technologies and what they can bring to the world. And I'm very excited to talk today with Manuel. Your thoughts and your book and everything you and your colleagues write about has obviously been very inspiring throughout the last years. So very much looking forward to this discussion, and also with everyone else here, whether you're joining from the beach in Italy or in India or in Vancouver. It's great to see that we're covering that many time zones.
Cool. Thanks, Kasper. And I'm so excited about this webinar that I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Christoph. I'm also from Humanitech, and I'm the moderator tonight, watching the chat, watching your questions, and guiding you through this. Third person tonight is Manuel. I think I met you the first time at the Velocity conference in 2019. I think that was November. If I remember right, you published your book in September, Team Topologies. It's a really, really good book. And I was able to listen to your talk. I think you were on a promotion tour for your book back then. Quite a while, quite a while since then. A lot of things happened. We'll talk about a few things later, like the academy that you started, which is really interesting. So yeah, I was listening to that talk, and I thought, yeah, there's so much truth in this book. It's amazing. And I wouldn't have imagined that that I have the option to now speak with you in a webinar 1.5 years later. It's great. But maybe you want to introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Sure, and it's kind of funny to think back about that time, because first it feels like a long time ago, and also the book had just came out. There was quite a lot of interest already, but we didn't know to what extent, and so it really rang a bell with many people in the organization. So it's really awesome. I'm also quite enjoy the work that Humanitech has done around internal platforms, and I'm happy to be in this webinar. So I'm one of the co-authors of the book, Team Topologies, Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow, with Matthew Skelton. That's basically what I'm known for these days. It's like when you have a child, you become the father, right? Your name doesn't matter anymore. You're just the father of the child. This is kind of a similar thing with the book. But basically, I have a background in computer science, and I had a number of different roles from development to team lead over the years, until sort of we condense some of the ideas and patterns in the book Team Topologies. So
great. Yeah. So maybe first thing we'll use this tool, polef.com, and let me just share also the link in the chat here. So if you go there, we'll have a couple of questions during this webinar where we like your view on. And so please go there now. And then Manuel, you can start with your first question.
Sure. So just to say, I was talking with Casper and Christoph, and we wanted to make this a little bit more interactive than the usual, set of slides, which I've done many times. But we just wanted to get more of a discussion, get people's input on, modern versus traditional platforms. And obviously there will be time for Q&A at the end, so we can discuss, address your specific questions. So we'll have, 4 questions for you to answer. If you go to that link, you should now be seeing this question. Where are you connecting from today? I see there are some answers. So every time there's a question like this, we'll wait a couple of minutes for people to answer, and then we'll go into a bit of discussion around the results, what that means. So looks like we have a winner, Europe. I guess before the Euro Cup starts, people are still have time to join webinars.
Yeah, we picked a good timing. You're absolutely right. I haven't thought about that. We have at least one person from another dimension. That's great. Or from the Matrix.
Yeah.
Like that.
Looks like a good mix, but more people from Europe's kind of the timing is probably better fit. Anyway, like Christoph said, this will be recorded, or is being recorded, will be shared after the webinar. So that's all good. You now see how this works, and we can get into the topic. So wanted to have a first question, which is, what are the main goals of an internal platform, right? We talk a lot about internal platforms in the last years, but what exactly are we trying to achieve, right? And so there are a number of options there. I definitely have seen big changes from I started about 20 years ago in the industry, where platform effectively meant something very different from today. And so it will be interesting to see what people have seen, what their experience is. So we see there are a fair amount of answers. So let's wait like a minute.
So when you started working in this field or on this topic, what was an internal platform back then?
You want me to be honest?
Yeah, I want you to be honest. Absolutely.
Was a bit of a mess, just a bucket of stuff that we thought we should have someone or team looking into this, because many teams need this sort of services or libraries or something like that. My first working experience was actually in a kind of small organization. So we were able to do things without a big platform, but then as I had contact with large organizations, I could see how seemed to be a pattern. So maybe we can get started. I think most people looks like have voted. So it's quite interesting. Centralizing share best practices, one of the main answers. Provide shared services, ensure compliance, and reduce cognitive load for consumers. So I'm happy to see that. I guess some people have read the book.
Yeah, there's one question from Vaidik, who asks, is consumers developers?
Mostly, yes. I tend to avoid just saying developers, because you can have platforms that are at sort of a different level. So you might have, for example, data platforms or even design platforms, right? A platform where we provide services to help with design. So it's not necessarily always developers, but most of the time, yes, most of the times the consumers are developers. So what we're trying to say here is, let's say, obviously this is a spectrum, right? It's not like there's a traditional platform which is totally different from a modern platform. It's sort of a spectrum, and the things that teams focus on in terms of platform go into this spectrum, right? What I'm trying to convey here is that modern platforms, which more like towards the right side, tend to have these days quite different focus than more traditional platforms on the left side. They tend to focus first on reducing cognitive load for the consumers, right? So the modern platform is not as concerned with shared services, reducing costs, but actually how do we provide services that are really helpful for our internal teams, for our development teams, and that means we're really focusing on what are the abstractions and what is the right user experience in the platform services. So it's a very different starting point, right? So traditionally, definitely 20 years ago, the focus was really, we need to centralize things, we need to share services, and sometimes trying to reduce costs with staff, assuming we'll need less people if this is centralized. So it's a very different starting point. And then there are some things that are sort of more or less in the middle, like best practices. Best practices are always contextual, right? So a best practice in one organization is not necessarily best practice in another organization. And the main difference, I think, in traditional platforms is that there is an assumption, implicit assumption, that we can define best practices for the whole organization. And even that is difficult. And so in modern platforms, there's a more of an understanding that actually what is a good practice for one team might not be so good for another team or another part of the organization. And so there's a lot more awareness of context when we're talking about best practices in the platform. It doesn't mean we're not trying to provide easy way, a good way to do things. That's absolutely correct. But we understand that there's more nuance. There is not just one size fits all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Kasper, I know you're talking to a lot of people that either build internal platforms or have built them or will build them. What's your view on that? What's modern right now? What's on top of mind with people?
Yeah, I think everything you said, Manuel, is spot on. I believe if we want to give some tangible examples, and we're talking about reducing cognitive load, which I think is something that we underappreciate as an industry as a whole. It's something. I mean, we are like this year in particular, this Corona year, like we're very short in talent, in time really to deliver all of those things that we now have to digitize. And talking about reducing cognitive load as the number one thing is such an important element here. And what I see a lot is that in teams you have situations where a front-end developer wants to be the best in React, wants to be the best in TypeScript, but ends up having to deal with super complex deployment setups, just to give you an example, and really is overwhelmed by that and understands that in this competitive HR market, you have to be the best at something and wants to focus on this one thing. And so this can lead to a lot of frustration, which is really why this reduction of cognitive load is so elementary. I think abstractions too, and useful abstractions, I think the word useful is here so important. We've seen a lot of the traditional platforms hiding away, abstracting away a lot of the things. And I'm talking to lots of teams that are super frustrated with the older platforms that they have in place that work. And I hear that sentence a lot. They're working in 90% of the cases, but the 10% really drive you crazy. And this is where you are restricting the creativity of developers, where you are holding back innovation. And this can have a deadly effect on the business as a whole. And so I believe having those two as the front runners is extremely important. And then you have obviously different things depending on the vertical, depending on the industry you're looking at. Compliance is and auditability is becoming remaining a huge thing. Security in general, we've just seen the Johnson & Johnson and like the attacks in the recent days, making sure you're streamlining this, but again, without restricting people in any way.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's definitely what I've seen, that in many cases, teams are forced to use the platform. So it's forced upon them. And because when you force the platform, you also reduce the incentive to listen to the needs of the teams. And you just come up with, not with bad intent, as a platform, you come up with what you think are the useful abstractions, but you haven't actually validated with the customers, with the consumers. And so you end up not covering those 10% or 20% or more of cases in a good way, and you're not giving the option to sort of opt out of the platform. And when we think about the platform as a product, then it shouldn't be different from any other product. Like, you go to a shoe store, you're not forced to buy the latest Air Jordan shoes. You can buy something else, or you can leave and not buy anything and you go somewhere else. And so if there is a valid justification for a given team that, we need to do whatever, our deployments in a different way, or we need to do something else in a different way, if it's justified, they should be able to do that. It's their own decision to invest in spending the effort doing this thing differently. But obviously, we want the platform to cover, the most of the scenarios. And for modern software delivery and operations, we sort of know what are the things that are needed, what are the good practices that we can provide to teams. So yeah, compliance is an interesting one. I think, again, it's the way we interpret compliance that is slightly different, or quite different. I think in traditional platforms has been more around what is the process we need to have in place to ensure compliance, while in modern platforms, but it's still starting, from my experience, that we're starting to look at how do we make sort of compliance and whatever controls sort of embedded in the platform services, so we can have the self-service pattern where teams can sort of self-check and self audit and things like that, by having those controls embedded in the platform, working together with the compliance experts, right?
Yeah, and I think
I think, Casper, you're always calling the golden path, if I'm right.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Zaga just asked in the chat, in terms of useful abstractions, how do you balance between having a suitable high-level abstraction while still providing access to the underlying tools mechanisms for 10% cases? And I think this concept of golden path is really something to look at. Like Jason Warner over at GitHub has been preaching that to me a lot. That's the way they're approaching their platform. And golden path means you are not enforcing the use of the platform, but you're offering the golden path, and it's golden path, not golden cage, right? Huge difference. They can deviate from this path if they want. And so I like to give the example with a lot of the platforms that we're seeing, the way configurations are produced, for instance, is running against a baseline YAML through a CLI, whatever. And this is the golden path if you want. But then certain developers want low-level scripting, and they want to do all of these different details. And so you give them the option to do that, like deliberately go off path, script everything themselves. And the only thing how you nudge people to stay on that path is through guarantees. You say, okay, you get certain logging guarantees, you get certain security guarantees, you don't need to be on pager duty. So a lot of the things that you can sort of nudge, but then if necessary, they can deviate. And what we're seeing in the numbers, which I find so fascinating, also in the usage of the teams that are building their platform API with Humanitech, is that 95, 96, 97% of the cases, people want to pick the golden path, right? This is a self-selecting mechanism.
Evan Butcher calls that making the right thing to do the easiest thing to do in the platform. which is basically the same. And just quickly in terms of abstractions, I quite like what Spotify has been doing. There was one article where they were talking about for their CI/CD services in the platform, they actually provide different entry points. Exactly, I think addressing the question in the chat, where they say, well, if you don't have any specific requirements, here are some templates. You just run with that, and you almost don't need to configure anything. It just works. If you have, on the other extreme, very specific needs for your pipelines, where maybe you need to do things that are very different from other teams for whatever reason, compliance or something else, then you can still even use the API for the CI/CD services directly. And so you build on top of that. So that's a great example where we are understanding the needs of different teams and providing useful abstractions at different levels, sort of different entry points to the same platform service.
Maybe watching the time a bit and keeping this interactive, Manuel, maybe we should move to the second question.
Let's move on. So just to quickly to sort of key takeaways here is that the platforms must help the users achieve the goals. So we need to understand their needs and simplify the tasks for them. So it's kind of what we've been saying. And importantly, the platform should not increase the cognitive load on teams, which is effectively what often happened with traditional platforms, because we're not paying enough attention to the user experience, to the customer needs, and we're plus mandating the platform on everyone. All right, so the next question, so in a second, you should see this appear in the link in the polling. How are internal platforms typically consumed? So in your experience, right, what have you seen? So there are different ways, and there might be other ones. So it would be interesting to see if people have other consumption patterns they've seen. But I've mostly seen, request-based, where one team asks another, the platform in this case, to do something for them. Collaboration, where two teams, a product team and a platform team are collaborating to do something. Pairing sometimes with a platform engineer with someone from a product team. Sometimes you have embedded platform engineers who are actually, at least for a period of time, part of the product team to help them. Well, depends what the objective is, but usually is to help the idea is to help the product team learn more about the platform by having someone embedded who is an expert. And then self-service, where we say most of the platform services don't require actually requests or any sort of actual interaction. We just consume them like we would consume AWS services or SaaS services, where we're not expecting to talk to an engineer at that company to be able to use their service, right? So I think we have a number of answers. Self-service, request-based, interesting, because those are kind of maybe two sort of extremes, and then a bit of the middle. So this quite matches my experience as well, what I've seen. So I think we can, discuss a little bit how we map this into this sort of spectrum. And my experience has seen, like I said, in traditional platforms, mostly it's request-based. So you have a platform team or multiple platform teams who own these shared services, but then the consumption is still based on someone makes a request, they wait for the platform team to come back to execute something, come back and say, we've deployed your application, or we've created infrastructure, or we opened some port. So these are all request-based or ticket-based, if you like. Some people call it high-touch sort of interaction. You need the platform team to do stuff for you. And that's where we come from, I think, traditionally. And sort of on the other extreme is the self-service. Why self-service so important? Because a couple of reasons. The first is obviously to allow product teams to go fast, right? So we reduce these wait times, we reduce the dependencies between product teams and platform teams, blocking dependencies, meaning we have to stop and wait for someone to do something for us. But it also drives, I think, good incentives for the platform teams to think about when is the service ready to be consumed in this self-service approach. Because if we sort of do it too early, maybe we didn't really put enough effort into maybe the reliability of the service. So there's a lot of errors happening, or maybe the documentation is not good enough for people to understand how to use it. What is going to happen is the platform team is going to have a lot of help requests, right, or support requests. And so it becomes sort of a cycle where we don't have time to improve the platform because we have all this support, but then it just continues, a vicious cycle. So we need to kind of have true self-service, but we also need collaboration. We need to understand the needs of the product teams. And so those two go together, right? Is almost sort of alternating. For a given platform service, we collaborate to understand the needs. Maybe the needs have changed, so we need to add some features or change something or cover those, other 10% of cases that were not covered. We collaborate, and then we work on providing this in the platform service and making it stable and reliable enough to be consumed by everyone, sort of making into generally available internally. And then go ahead.
Yeah, maybe Caspar, because I think that's an interesting point. I think as you're always distinguishing between the ops and the dev view on things with that. So what's your line of thought there?
Well, I mean, like side comment, I would be interested. Like, I know, Manuel, you are working with our friends at Puppet on the latest Puppet DevOps report. So maybe you can share a couple of things, because I think if you look at the pure data really around self-service, it's so obvious that it's probably the thing to reach true DevOps, in my opinion. I think maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit in a second. I think as an industry, we've been a little bit distracted by different tendencies. How should I put it? If I can put it like this. So early 2000s, we were used to throw things over the fence to ops, and then, okay, they should take care of that, right? And then 2008, Werner Vogels, who was the CTO at AWS, said, yeah, you build it, you run it. So everyone was doing everything, or this was what we were striving towards. And I think the problem with developer, with you build it, you run it, is if you give people everything to do, right, you basically, for some strange reason, end up with a situation again where they're throwing things over the wall in a completely unstructured, because they're, I don't know, overwhelmed or whatever, and cognitive load, like we've just mentioned that. And so developer self-service is so powerful because now ops or the platform team almost sets a set of rules or documentation, the platform or API, that can help people and balance the trade-off between cognitive load and being able to do everything. And this is extremely powerful because, in my opinion, this is what actually leads to a true you build it, you run it. You build it, you run it doesn't mean that the front-end developer becomes a Linux kernel hacker, if you want, right? So yeah, that's
I like this comment by Sagar, who's saying we swung hard from throw over the wall to have devs do everything. We need to find a golden mean. Again, the word golden, I like that scene. Is that what a platform is intended to do, Manuel? Is that what the platform is intended to do?
Exactly. This also reminds me, a similar pattern happened when we started talking about agile testing, and suddenly companies are going, well, we don't need testers anymore. We don't need a test team. Well, you need the knowledge and the skills, and it's actually quite broad to understand how to do proper test automation and test cases, etc. So we're not saying we don't need those skills anymore, but the way we're consuming and the way that we're providing that sort of support is different with a modern platform. So it's exactly what Caspar was saying, that we're saying, okay, if you're a build and run team, what that means is you have the accountability and responsibility to take ownership of the service you provide to end customers. But we need to provide you the tools. We can't just say, well, you're on your own, and now suddenly, instead of this stack, now we have this stack to take care of, and we have 10 times more responsibilities and skills. No, that's not what we're saying.
And more cognitive load, right?
Yeah, it just explodes. And that's the problem. Teams are often being asked to do so many things and without being given the proper support and help from other teams. And that's why in Team Topologies, we talk about this team of teams or ecosystem of teams. Yes, mostly you need product teams to provide services to end customers, but you need these other teams like platform and enabling teams to help upskill and provide useful services and abstractions.
I think you have some nice graphics for that in your book, right? If I remember right. Maybe they explain them very well. I think you have them also here in the, if you go to the next slide, I think if I remember right,
Yeah, so what we're saying is kind of important takeaway here for modern platforms is that this is kind of the general pattern that we should be seeing, right? Where there's collaboration needed between product teams and platform teams, especially if it's a new service, a new some new feature set that is needed, then we need to collaborate to identify, even if it's just to say, this is how the API should look like. Here are some test cases, so then we can test and see if this works as both teams expect. So we're doing some discovery, as we do for end customer products, or we should do some discovery what the customers need. And then when we have a better idea, then it becomes more of a stable service at some point that we can say, okay, now this is ready to be consumed by anyone in the organization if they wish to do so, because now this is sort of that golden path. Ideally, we're providing a service that's useful to many teams. But we should expect to see this pattern repeating over and over in modern platforms. In traditional platforms, there's more of a tendency to build more stuff, and we think the worth of the platform is tied to more features, more services, but we haven't really figured out if these are helping the product teams or not. We just assume they are, and that's often the problem.
Agree.
So let's go to the last question, so we have a bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah, because we already have first questions for Q&A, so yeah.
Okay, so let's go. Who decides which services and features to provide, to build into the platform? Again, I've seen different stakeholders. So there's a part here which is, are stakeholders deciding, or customers deciding, or who is deciding, right? So at least I've seen these different types of stakeholders having strong influence or decision power over what we build in the platform. There's some answers coming in. So it seems a lot of people are saying the product teams, the consumers of the platform team themselves, product managers. Okay. So maybe we can, I think it's it shows that there are different multiple inputs to the decision making around what should we go and build in the platform. So obviously we should aim to build the minimum possible, right? Why would we build something if we can rely on third parties that it's their business to provide this sort of services? So that's one of the key things. If we build less, we can focus more of our effort on what is a good abstraction. So we provide a sort of internal differentiator to our teams by providing useful abstractions, perhaps on top of the third parties. Sometimes that might mean even just providing some guidance. How do we use AWS services? What are some useful configurations? Things like that. So in terms of the spectrum, this is how I see it, obviously, in my head and in my experience. So in traditional platforms, I saw often that the CTO or the sort of the executives have the strong influence. Because again, not with any sort of bad intention. The intention was good, but they tend to think about kind of very high level goals, and we need to be like this other organization, or we need to be like Spotify or what have you, and we need to build all this stuff because we've seen a really good example and now we want to do the same internally. And that tends to lead again to sort of bloated platforms where we're trying to build too much and we don't really understand how is this going to be used, right? So there's nothing wrong with having a sort of long-term strategy and some kind of high-level goals, but then in terms of actually deciding what we build, then that should be with the people who do the work and with the people who are going to consume it. And so I would say that in modern platform teams, it's the teams themselves should decide, strongly influenced and informed by what they're being asked to do by the product teams, maybe in some cases the product managers of the product of the end customer products, maybe heads of departments. Obviously depends a little bit what is the context of organization, what are their roles. But the reason why you see those roles more or less in the middle is because, to me, those are kind of inputs, right? They're inputs to the decision making, but they're not the people who decide. It's not about a product team or development team coming to the platform saying, well, build this and I need it in the next month. Because the platform teams, it's not, especially if they're being successful, they probably have a lot of requests. So they need to have really good product management to prioritize and understand, is this something that is a common demand from multiple teams, or is this something that's very specific for one team? And maybe we need to ask that team to, invest some effort initially to do it by themselves, and then later we can bring it into the platform. It's not easy. And so product management for platform is super important. I often tell customers, some customers haven't realized the need for product management in platform, and the ones who do think, well, we can have someone who's more junior, and I tell them you should do the opposite. Have someone who is very experienced at product management help the platform teams, because it's not easy. And
treat it like a product. And I think that's, but Kasper, go ahead. I think you wanted to say something.
No, I'm just saying, like those platforms have a huge impact, right? You have to take that very serious. If done right, this can be a huge game changer. But it's really, you can think of as like any other product. The last thing you want is your CEO to walk into the department and say, hey, I've heard, I was in this call, and I from all the hundreds of customers we have, I heard that we need this button, and so everyone jumps at this. Like it's established that this is not a good idea, but for some strange reason, in a lot of engineering organizations, we still have this top level says we want this, and I believe I like this calling the middle the input. What I heard from Nigel at Disney, what they do, what I really like, and what we've also started to do at Humanitech, is that we are doing joint hackathons where also really the platform sits with the engineers. Like you really look at the daily workflows. They can see what can they like workflow hackathons, if you want, where you can say what is the next best feature, and then you do a prioritization, and you manage that with in your Jira board. That is so important. And do you need a dedicated platform team? Yeah. I mean, but some people call it. We see a huge, like I hear people saying, oh yeah, now we need to get a platform team. I mean, you might already have it, but you call it different. It can be a part of the SRE team. It can be part of the infrastructure team. It can be part of the DevOps team. But then I think you should really take them out of these operational roles, maybe, or at least a little bit, or some part of the week, and let them focus on this, because the impact, they can have so much leverage.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I remember a discussion we had with one of the guys building the internal developer platform for Adevinta, and one of the things he said, it's really a product. You even need market research, because as you said earlier, Manuel, you need to find out what's there, what are third parties already building, and everybody who ever pulled up something like the tool landscape from CNCF knows that there's like tons of tools out there. You can't compete with them, but you need to figure out as a platform team which ones do I want to embrace and use and integrate, and where do I want to build my own thing because I as a company need it. Yeah, and I like this treat your platform team like any product. That's, I think, a key to success.
Yeah, and I think you should be, as a platform team, should be looking at how do we, as your internal teams, as sort of it's your market, right? So you want to sell to that market, between quotes. And so understand what makes a difference. And maybe a good sort of heuristic is thinking, if I'm going to build this thing in our platform, would I buy this same thing from a third party? If the answer is clearly yes, that's because I can see the need and I can see how this is providing value internally. But maybe it doesn't exist, so we have to build it ourselves. But you should be thinking about that. Would I buy this thing from a third party because I can really see the value, or I have validated that this is important for our internal teams? And so this image here, I think, also conveys that in traditional platforms, there's a sort of blurry lines between everyone is a customer, right? It's blurry between who are stakeholders, who are the actual users, customers. And so traditional platform teams tend to be overloaded. They have all these requests and they have huge roadmaps, and things take very long to come out. Take months or years to maybe get something out, which was really important a year ago. So what happens? The team that needed it, or the teams that needed it, probably have found an alternative solution, whether that's approved officially or not in the organization. So shadow IT and these kind of things. And so Caspar mentioned the State of DevOps report. So it's interesting because we're and I think Nigel Kirsten from Puppet was here as well.
Yes.
So we're working with them, sort of looking at the results, and it's quite interesting because it's effectively two of the key things that are now clearly differentiating high-performing organizations from a business perspective as well, from sort of mid-performing. So now many organizations have set up some DevOps tooling practices and approaches, but what differentiates is first the self-service pattern that we were talking about, because that's what allowed teams to really go fast. And second is product management inside the platform. So it's really, I think, will be really interesting for people to read the State of DevOps report coming out, I think this month still, with Puppet Labs, from Puppet Labs.
All right, Manuel, let's wrap this up here because we already have a number of questions for the Q&A.
So yeah, the key takeaways is we need modern and experienced product management in the platform, and the platform, we should see it as a curated experience for engineers. So they are the customers of the platform, right? So that should be very clear. There can be a lot of demand around them, from the CTO to, I don't know, other product managers and anyone else in the organization. But we need to have clear that the customers are the engineers. So that's what we're working towards. And then, we hear the other people as well, but we take that into consideration. But who is going to use the platform are the engineers, not the other people.
Absolutely.
So just before we go into Q&A, the slides will be available as well, right? So there are some resources, talks, and I had an article that has done quite well around Kubernetes in the light of, you need the sort of internal platform around it as well. It's not the whole thing. And there are a number of other examples from different companies, from Adidas to Zalando, etc. And finally, because we're just working on this right now, in our Team Topologies Academy, we're working on this platform as a product course, self-paced, on demand. So this should come out in the summer. And for this webinar, we have a 10% discount code that will be also available in the slides. And
I'll share the link also together with the recording.
Perfect.
And I think that's it for people that want to learn more. Obviously, it's reading the book, and then if you want to learn even more, I think the Team Topologies Academy is a great concept.
Yeah, it was limited.
Okay.
So we're now digging into the platform and going more in depth with what we discussed today and a lot more.
Yeah,
cool.
Warm recommendation.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, just like a warm recommendation to look at this. I've been fortunate to have a sneak peek, and I think it's really summing up everything you need to know. But yeah, we have a lot of questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's start with the first question. So Nimesh is asking, do we have a pattern or a suggested path of migration from the traditional to modern interaction model? So for dev teams and the platform with least disruptions. And there's a disclaimer, I haven't read the book yet.
That's fine. The book doesn't cover specifically, migration. That is a very common question. I think when we had a prep chat a couple of weeks ago, we were just talking about that, right? So I believe you've had many clients, and we also see that there's a sort of, okay, this makes a lot of sense, but we are sort of stuck with a more traditional platform. How do we move? And from my perspective is, first of all, be a little bit opportunistic, right? Look at, what are the difficulties that teams have today with your platform? One very common that I see, especially in large organizations, is that we're often putting the onus, the responsibility on product teams to manage multiple requests to different other teams. So when a team needs a new environment for their application, even a test environment, typically still see this very often. They need to ask one team to create infrastructure, another team to change some security settings, another team to install the database. And it just becomes a nightmare. It consumes a lot of time and cognitive load as well from the product team just to get a test environment. So whether it is that or something else that you can clearly see, this is costing effort and mental effort from our product teams or development teams. What can we do something? And sometimes it's just even starting with sort of an abstraction on top of that, where you say, okay, let's start here. Let's provide a service which all you need to do is send us a request with what you need in the test environment to continue with that example. And maybe we don't even build anything yet. We just set up sort of the interface for the platform service is this. You provide this information and we'll provide you with the environment. And you don't have to worry about anything else. And maybe initially it's sort of a still a manual thing, right? Your new platform team needs to coordinate with the other teams, but at least you've helped reduce cognitive load on the product team. And then you go and automate, and then you go and reduce sort of the overall effort of that service. So that's how I would start it. And I would think about, what do we need in terms of skills for this platform team? Probably you need a mix, right? Especially
that's directly into another question. Vaidik is asking, what's your recommendation on structuring platform teams? How many platform teams should be there? How should one decide the boundary and responsibilities of a platform team?
It needs to evolve, right? So first of all, it's not something that you can decide up front. You need to think about what are we going to start with, especially if you're in this sort of migration pattern. I actually have had this week a call with a client where they have they're kind of smallish, and they have 4 what we call stream teams or product teams, and they have 4 platform teams, and they're like worried, do we have too many platform teams? And I said, there is no hard rule, right? If those platform teams are actually helping provide the services that are needed, and then you have 4 stream teams that can go really fast because there's a lot that they don't have to worry about. They're really focusing on the customers, which seems to be the case. That's fine. If you don't have the resources and you need to start small, that's also fine. Again, think about what would be the service that will really show that provide value and reduce cognitive load, and start there. In terms of the composition,
maybe building on that, because I don't think we have time to answer all the questions in detail, but maybe building on that, what SLOs would you typically monitor for a platform product?
Yeah, I think one more thing to tie the last 2 questions together, because I think we're at a really interesting point here. I think one of the things, both in terms of the structure of the platform team, how many platform teams are okay, what's the minimum viable, if you want, you want to start to have a healthy relationship between total variance of technologies in use and the amount of resources that you can throw at this. So if you can afford to have a platform team for VMs, a platform team for serverless, and a platform team for Kubernetes, whatever, then yeah, that's okay, but you're usually resource constrained, right? You want to have a situation where developers are able to swap between teams fluently, where onboarding is very simple. And so one of the recommendations is always like, start to find a common denominator where you think the future lies. And if you say that is Kubernetes, okay, then go with Kubernetes, stick to it, and make sure you are making those decisions to streamline stuff. Then the next thing is, okay, once I have that, I can maybe look at streamlining configuration management. I can then streamline infrastructure orchestration. I think that is I love this idea of Manuel to say, okay, first we are going to have the ticket based, and there's a human in the background. We can see, okay, there are a lot of tickets coming in. This is actually something we can standardize. And then next thing we can say, we automate the config side, we automate the orchestration side. All of a sudden we are able to stand up dynamic environments. And you reach this point iteratively. On the element of what should you measure, I don't know who that was, Gene Kim maybe, who said measure your platform teams through the thank yous you get from your developers, which I think is great. Yes. My favorite one is deployment frequency, because I believe it shows you so much about the health. If you have a low deployment frequency, that can be because of your setup. It can also be that people are afraid of change failure rates. So failed deployments usually lead to management calling you, and you want to avoid that. So you're keeping deployments back until they are over tested, if you want. But if you have a healthy deployment rate, that says so much, right? It means that you have a like failure culture, like a culture that enables failure and doesn't penalize too much. You're able to move fast without breaking things, because maybe you have a canary deployment and it will revert. You feel secure. You work in small iterations. So for me personally, I don't know what you think, Mario, but deployment frequency is really the key measure.
I like the thank yous. I actually was thinking another metric could be how often does the platform team say no? That's sort of the reverse, right? So it shouldn't be too high. It shouldn't be too low. You have to say no because you probably have too many demands. But if you're always saying no, that means you're not building in enough time and effort to listen to the needs of the teams. So some range there would make sense. But what I recommend is, okay, now we think about platform as a product. That means we need to think about adoption lifecycle as well. So what that means is that, like any technology that you provide, there are going to be early adopters, late adopters, laggards. And so you need to understand sort of where is my service in this lifecycle, in this. So there are different kinds of metrics. We can look at, or we should start looking at adoption metrics and engagement metrics. How much, how many deployments, for example, are going through the platform versus, people are doing deployments on their own outside the platform, or anything else that you want to, that the platform is providing. So USwitch has a really, really cool example, which is on our site in industry examples. And they did that. They were looking at, the engagement of their teams with the platform because it was not mandatory. Once you're past that stage, you probably need to look at reliability metrics. Once you're trying to get the sort of the larger majority, the late majority to adopt your platform, maybe they have concerns about the reliability or the usability. So at that moment, maybe you need to start looking more at reliability metrics and see, what do we need to sort of convince this late majority that it's okay to adopt the platform, that we will provide a service that they can trust. And so one of the type of metrics I tend to recommend to look, to give less priority is the actual velocity of the platform team in terms of how many features we deliver. That, of course, it's interesting, but don't start with that. Don't start looking at how many features we delivered in the last sprint or quarter in the platform, because that doesn't mean much if the features are not what our customers need, right? If we deliver the features, but then no one's using them, right? The same as for any other product. So basically, look at metrics depending on where you are in the adoption cycle of the platform service.
I think that's a very good way of looking at that. Maybe jumping into the next question, Michael is asking, what do security, risk, and compliance teams think about this idea? Does the standardization make their life easier? And does that encourage them to get behind and support the change? Does it make it more predictable for product teams that their compliance requirements are met and minimal last-minute fire drills?
I think that is a question that is really dependent on the implementation of the product, but and the product platform is a product. But I do think that like all security teams I know love platforms because things become more predictable. So you like that can be because of a couple of reasons. If you, for instance, standardize configuration management, you usually have an audit stream of everything that happens. So in like financial institutions I talk to, the security teams are screaming of joy. So they very much like it. But it's also things like baking security in the process. Let's give a tangible example. You have a environment variable that helps your service connect to a database, right? Because you want to have dynamic environments, you are using variable substitution to inject the right database name into this key value pair, and that means you can enforce this, right? Because the golden path will always mean that you're using this approach, and you can by design use, I don't know, HashiCorp Vault, like make sure that this is stored as secrets, and by this really instill security in the process. So I'm usually seeing them very, very positive about these things.
Yeah, I see a mix where, yes, there is some reluctance from more traditional compliance and risk teams because they haven't seen this model work in their organization. And so there is some initial sort of reluctance, but when you start talking to them and explaining, and with security teams in particular, and explaining, you also have very high cognitive load. Typically, they have a lot to worry about. And if you have this model where you have a security teams dedicated to doing all the security, and sort of stuff comes into them at the end of the life cycle, they're not happy. They have so much cognitive load as well. So when you start talking to them about that, and you start saying, what if some of this stuff could be pushed in platform, and you're building into the platform what Kaspar was saying earlier, this guarantees that if you use this service, then you get this sort of security validations, for example. That helps, I think, both security and product teams. And so the security teams can now focus on the things that are not so easy to automate or not so easy to bake into the platform services. I think it's an area where we're going to see a lot of evolution. So people like John Willis from Red Hat also talk a lot about that, compliance as code and this kind of things. I have a talk with Mario Platt, who is expert in securities, which is quite interesting as well. So if you look that up, he talked about how he sees that the types of teams apply to the security domain, right? Because it's quite broad. There's all sorts of security teams and compliance. And so he has done sort of that mapping of what could be the types of teams, which teams could become like platform around security, which teams could be more enabling, kind of helping the development teams learn what they need to know about security rather than, again, sort of being a dependency where we just push the work to the security team. It's evolving. There is some reluctance still, but like Kaspar said, I think the teams have seen it work, really are sort of quite ecstatic about it, because now we don't have all this on our plate anymore, and we can focus on the real things that add value from that perspective.
Cool. I mean, watching the time, we are getting close to an hour. I say we do one final question, and then we call it a day. And there's one very interesting last question, I think, from Tejas. In my current organization, the platform team is overwhelmed with supporting product teams in using the platform. And at the same time, not all product teams are using the internal platform, CI/CD, due to low trust in the platform. What's the first step the platform team organization needs to do to improve this situation? How do you get out of this trap?
There is one, like Vaidik, you seem to be very well informed about these things, so I think that is a great answer. I would add that we had the guy who built the platform at Adevinta for 1,500 engineers. It was a very interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago. I can't recall. And he said, do not compete with standard offerings. So like good example, like would you build your CI pipeline from scratch right now? Probably not. And that holds true for a lot of things. It's unlikely that a platform team can compete with 150 engineers that are just focusing on one little bit. So what is there out there that you can use and adapt to your situation, right? And obviously not without, like, you shouldn't be restricted by anything, but there are always these little hacks where you can speed things up if you want. And that would probably be one thing I would be looking at.
Yeah, I would say if you're in that situation, then definitely you need to get out there and talk to the teams. And, you know, sometimes it's not super comfortable because historically maybe there have been frictions, but, you know, someone has to make that step if you want the platform to be better understood. And the other thing is, you know, so first understand why are people reluctant to use the platform so that you can then work on that. Like I said, sometimes is they don't trust the reliability. Maybe they had, you know, they were unlucky and they tried to do, you know, use the platform and they were often having, you know, the platform was not available or had maintenance work. And so they sort of lost trust in it. And in our industry, I think sometimes we're also too quick to distrust things, unfortunately, but it is like that. And so you need to reach out and talk and understand why is there reluctance to use the platform. And that sort of fits into kind of understanding where we are in the adoption of the platform. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is platform teams should have some effort available to sort of evangelize. I know not everyone likes that, but maybe you have some people in the team who are more interested, or maybe, you know, it is sort of a rotation, but you need to dedicate some time, you know, obviously not most of your time, but some time to sort of marketing and evangelizing internally, because it's a product, right? You need to, when you're selling products to customers, you also need to market them and explain why is this useful for you to buy and give us your money. And so it's sort of the same thing. And there are some really cool examples, for example, from HelloFresh. I think they're based in Germany,
yes.
like guys. Some really cool articles where they think about the branding of even their command line tools, right? How do we brand this? And they have a little logo and they have some, I think some like, sort of little gifts, mugs and with brands. And there's another example from, I think it's an actual public organization in Finland called NAV. And their platform team actually has a website as if it was, you know, AWS or something, where they gave a name to the platform, they have the information there and anyone can access, you know, and it feels like a product, right? So it has its own brand, it has its own kind of value proposition. And that's what we should be looking at. And it's not very familiar to many people, and you don't have to do everything in one go, but just start thinking about allocating some effort to this evangelizing internally.
Yes, that's a nice last word, Manuel. So we reached an hour, so we slightly over time, but it's a really interesting discussion. There's more questions, so we should probably think about a part 2 of this. We can think about that later. But first of all, thank you for today. Thanks for everybody who participated. Thank you, Kasper. Thanks, Manuel. That was great. As I said in the beginning, we'll share the recording tomorrow. We'll include some useful links, including the 10% off offer for the Team Topologies Academy, and also some of the talks and probably discussions we mentioned as video links so that you can dive deeper into the topic. And if you want to follow up with either you, Kasper, or Manuel, I think people are also welcome to just reach out.
Yeah, welcome to reach out on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever.
Cool. So thank you. Thank you for everybody attending today.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.